Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks so much, Selma, for the invitation, and Josh. It's a pleasure to be back here once again. I have quite a lot to cover today, so I'm going to talk in my very fast native New York style, rather than my acquired South Carolina drawl, and hopefully we can squeeze in a lot of information today. So session one offered an overview of the enormous amount of material that a young musician needs to encounter on the road to becoming a mature artist. It proposed that the intermediate level studio teacher must find an appropriate sequence of these materials in order to cover everything effectively and efficiently. Just as a math teacher or an English teacher uses a syllabus to create a logical succession of tasks for a young student, the applied studio string teacher should have a clear methodology to ensure that all the material is covered and that the student builds a secure technique based on a solid foundation. As I mentioned in the first session, the term intermediate student here means a young cellist who's played for a few years, perhaps having started in a public school program or a Suzuki program. The student may be playing through fourth position, but is motivated to become a better player, requiring individual attention. He or she is probably not very clear thinking about what they're doing technically, and probably has not been exposed to the kind of self-discipline required for playing on a higher level. Our society does not generally stress discipline, and most young people need help with organizing their technical skills, their practice routines, consistency, and their ability to concentrate for lengthy periods of time. The kind of discipline our profession requires is, and of course it's not working, not the rigid, submissive discipline attained through force and fear, but a far healthier type of inner discipline and self-discipline based on mutual respect and mutual purposes. As I mentioned in the last session, I usually divide my lessons and the students' practicing routine into 5 parts: warm-ups, exercises, scales and arpeggios, etudes, and pieces. Today, I want to focus on the warm-ups and some general thoughts about the joy and usefulness of exercises in our teaching and playing. But before that, I want to actually talk a little bit about the importance of the first few lessons with a new student, and even what happens prior to the very first lesson. This is actually a really critical step in setting up the expectations and goals for both the teacher and the student, and to make sure that they're both on the same page. So before the first lesson, after I hear the student audition, I talk with both the student and the parents about expectations and goals, including how much I would expect the student to practice. I also let them know that I expect weekly lessons and the scheduled master classes during the semester. At the first lesson, I usually start by checking the student's cello to make sure it's in good condition, and I often play a little on the instrument to see how it responds. Many students don't really know the correct names for the various parts of the cello, so often I have them draw a picture and go through all the parts, making sure that they know the right terminology. Usually I do this in the very first master class with everyone together rather than taking too much time in a lesson. But I do want to make sure that they're using the correct terms for the parts of the cello, and that they know the various kinds of woods and other materials that are used in the bow and the cello. Next, I look for how the student is actually holding the cello and make any corrections. So the first thing is to check is that a student is using the correct height chair. Tall cellists tend to slide their feet back if the chair is too low, and as a result they lose their solid base and the foundation may be wobbly. For a good sitting position, the cellist should probably have the hips slightly higher than the knees, so a good cello chair or a piano bench is essential. It's important that the legs should go straight down, not pulled back, as I mentioned. So Paul Katz has a good exercise to demonstrate that the feet should go straight down. And you can all try this with me without a cello. If you sit in a chair with your feet straight down. I'm going to actually move my chair back so you can see my full body. I think you can see me now. So Paul's exercise is to have the legs straight down and just rotate around the hips like this. And you'll notice you can do that pretty easily. And then he has you move the legs back the way sometimes cellists do sit poorly and then do the same rotation, you'll notice that you're using muscles over here and it's tense, and you may feel in the solar plexus a lot of tension and that sort of thing. So obviously it's a good test for the fact that it's better to have the feet straight down. The next thing is for how to hold the cello. And I generally think of three things in holding the cello. First, that the lower bout of the cello is rubbing against the lower leg or someplace by the knee and so forth. And the reason for that is so that you can actually move left and right like this and have it slide, have both sides of the cello sliding against your legs. And that becomes very important afterwards when we do left-right motion or contrary motion. The second thing I look for is someplace in the middle of the chest like that. And then the third thing is that the neck of the cello is about 3 fingers or so from your shoulder. And the other issue, of course, with how to hold the cello is the length of the end pin. And it's not just how high or low the end pin is, but also where exactly it is hitting the floor. So it can be a little further out or close into the body. And so there's a lot of things that one can kind of adjust for finding the right position. And as cellists grow, we actually have to be careful and make sure that the end pin of the cello is growing with them also, and that we constantly sort of check on the way they're holding the cello. Of course, the cello position depends a lot on the body shape of the cellist, whether the upper body is long or short, or depending on the length of the legs, or if a woman has large breasts. But I found that these 3 guidelines work on average for most cellists. In the first lesson, the primary focus for me is on the bow arm, since that's where the basic production of sound occurs. Without a good foundation in the right arm, any work on the left side will be ineffective. Whoops. So, the right arm. In other words, we have to play with a good sound from the bow before adding the left hand. People who listen to us play are often amazed with the way the left hand works, the shifting and the vibrato and the speed of our fingers. What these people don't realize is that the real artistry is in the bow arm. That's where we create the magic of dynamics and phrasing and tone color, etc. So we start with some open strings. And I work, first of all, on what I call a core sound. That's a sound with a real center to it. So we work first on getting a core sound on the G string. A real sort of center. And this is as opposed to what I call a resonant sound. I don't know if you can hear that. Hopefully you can hear the difference through the internet there. So maybe Dvorak as opposed to Bach. So this is perhaps the most important first thing to accomplish in a first lesson, because it can really change a student's sound, and it can change the way students hear their own sound under their ears. The core sound is the sound we need in order to project the sound of the cello. Most kids play so it sounds very pretty to them as they sit behind the cello under their ears, but they need to train their ears to know how to make the sound they need in order to project their playing to the audience. I always find it interesting that I can change a student's sound to create the core sound within a few minutes of work together. And if they practice it for a week by themselves, they come back as a really changed player and often get an immediate reaction from their parents when they play for them. Psychologically, that's very helpful because it means they will have bought into changing things that will affect their playing right from the get-go. Next, we work on getting the same core sound from the frog to the tip. When I ask the students to play an open G string using the full bow, I want them to notice that they're likely getting a diminuendo as they go to the tip. I explain that what they need to be able to do is to play with what I call a block of sound from the frog to the tip. In other words, no change in the volume or the timbre as they use the full bow. They likely don't know how to do that. They don't know how to fix that natural diminuendo without forcing. So next we talk about how the arm works in the best way ergonomically. So cellists generally identify 4 parts of the right arm that are involved in playing: the upper arm, the lower arm, the wrist, and the fingers. When playing, cellists have to be aware of which part of the arm they're using. In this first lesson, I'm only concerned with the larger parts of the arm, the upper and the lower arm, to help get a good sound at the tip and to be able to release the tension at the frog. So for that, I asked the students to play from the frog to the middle of the bow and ask which part of the arm they're using. So frog to the middle. And very often, they're not aware that they're using the upper arm. But with a few repetitions, they begin to understand. And then I asked them to go from the middle to the tip. And again, they usually don't really know what they're using or should be using, that they should be using the lower arm. And then I often will ask them to play using the whole bow and say out loud the part of the bow, that part of the arm that they're using and the part of the bow. So they might say upper arm, lower arm, lower arm, upper arm. And so we figure out that the formula is the upper part of the arm controls the lower part of the bow, and the lower part of the arm controls the upper part of the bow. I like putting some of these little rules into little mantras that are easily verbalized and easily memorized. Next, I asked the students to observe their elbows as they go from the frog to the tip. And then I asked them to tell me the geometric shape of what the elbow is actually doing. Sometimes people see a straight line at first. And so it's sometimes helpful to have the students actually imagine having a pencil attached to their right elbow and imagine drawing with this pencil on a piece of paper. Then they begin to see that the elbow describes an arc as it goes from the frog to the tip, with the lowest place at the frog and the highest part of the arc when playing at the tip. The elbow arc is one of many rounded figures in playing the cello, whether it involves string crossings or shifting or even parts of the instrument itself. The lower bout is round, the F-holes are round, the top of the bridge is round, the shoulders are round. And so here, in this case, the mantra that we use is the elbow goes in an arc. Sometimes the string doesn't speak well at the beginning of the note, so we have to figure out how to get a good sound when you start a note. And so I asked the students to imagine a k sound as they start. K. And then I show them what I call the getting in the string exercise. You let the arm get really heavy, and we actually may need to do some exercises to show how to get relaxation and get a heavy arm just by sort of dropping the arm is one of those exercises. There are lots of those kind of exercises. So you get more weight into the string. And then with this exercise, the getting in the string exercise, you move the string back and forth with the weight of the arm. But the arm weight then will probably be so heavy, so I tell them to imagine a helium balloon lifting the weight a little, and then use a very slow bow to get the k sound. Usually they'll play way too fast at first. And so they have to figure out how slow a bow they have to use. Sometimes I'll actually show them the trick of using the barbs of the bow hair to get a little click sound, just one click. I'll see if this works for me today. You heard that click maybe? There's a click. Yeah, so hopefully you can hear that through the internet. So that was one click from one barb of the bow hair. Needless to say, this is not the real goal for our playing. It's obviously just an experiment, but it's the kind of image for how slow the bow has to go. And it's usually fun to have the students figure out how to do that, because you have to actually be very relaxed as you start doing that little exercise, and then a very slow bow. The next important concept is to make sure that the student understands the fundamental principles for getting a good sound. And being able to change the tone color, the dynamics, the kind of stroke we use, et cetera, et cetera. It's what I call the three principles of tone production: contact point, weight, and speed. I'm sure that we all teach these basic elements, and I don't really want to spend any more time on them here unless you have some questions afterwards. The main point here is that all of these things are preliminary to being able to work on bow technique starting in the second lesson and afterwards. I sometimes describe the three principles of tone production as being like a painter who has a palette for mixing colors. He puts maybe red and yellow and blue on the palette and then mixes them together to get green or orange or purple. We mix our contact point, weight, and speed together to get the myriad possibilities of tone colors that we use in music. Notice that the sequence of doing all of these beginning exercises are in a specific order. That's also part of my sequential approach. One starts with the fundamental sound, the core sound, and then we start figuring out how to achieve that sound easily and with as little tension as possible. But there's one more concept that I think is really important especially for the young player, and I try to make sure that I cover it in the very first lesson because it helps with making all of those previous concepts easier to achieve. This involves the vital concept of balance. We use balance when we walk, with the right arm balancing your left leg and vice versa. And when you throw a ball, of course, you don't throw a ball like this, you throw it by using balance. And we should be using balance in all aspects of our playing, whether it's our basic sitting position, as we talked about, or with our vibrato, or with shifting, etc., etc. So likewise, when you move your bow, it's very helpful to use similar balances involving movements in the opposite directions. So the body moves to the left while the bow moves to the right, and vice versa. I call this left-right motion or contrary motion. This concept is vital for a young player because it helps with coordination and sound production at the tip, and most importantly with relaxation at the frog. It's especially necessary at the earliest stages of development for an intermediate level cellist because it establishes principles that will be built on in the next lessons. The way I teach this to someone who's never done it before is to actually start without the cello, and I hope you can see my legs so I don't have to move back again, but basically you get the idea. You put your weight on the right side and swing your left leg, and then you put your weight on the left side and swing your right leg. And then maybe pretend like you're holding the bow at the frog. You have your weight on the right side. Again, swing the left leg if you need to, or just feel the weight there. And then go to the left side and feel so you're sitting on the left side and you feel the bow going. So you're balancing always to the middle. And by the way, the middle for us is not the middle of the cello because we're sitting to one side. So the middle is here, and this is the way we're balancing. And then you do the same thing with just with the bow, balancing left and right like that, and paying attention to the block of sound, the core sound, and getting a good sound at the tip and all those issues. And for most people, it becomes so much easier to get the good sound at the tip if they're using the contrary motion. So I don't want to spend too much time on this here, but the way to ingrain this concept after the initial getting the coordination down is to just do the open strings, and then to use it in the scales and arpeggios, and then in etudes wherever possible, and also in pieces. For example, the beginning of Kol Nidre. The Danzauer etudes also are a great way for training this, since so many of them involve using the full bow and making a crescendo to the tip. One of my sequential principles is the right hand before the left hand. The students are often surprised by the enormous changes in their sound right away in the first lesson by working on these concepts for the bow. So in the first lesson, after we work on the bow arm, I do talk then briefly about the left hand organization, and also demonstrate and explain how to work on and play the 2-octave Foyar scale and arpeggio system. I'm going to go over that in a future part of this live stream series when we talk about the sequential system for scales and arpeggios. So next, some of the basics for the left hand. So the main left hand issues in that first lesson involve the finger spacing, making sure there are half steps between the fingers in normal position, the fingers being perpendicular to the string, the fingers being round, that there's a tunnel underneath the fingers, and especially that the thumb is under the second finger, and that there are no kinks or bends in the arm. So there's a kind of a straight line going in the arm from the fingers all the way up to the shoulder. In many ways, this first lesson is the most important for setting up the groundwork for the future. not only for the technical foundation, but also the seriousness of our work together. I'm not looking for my students to be my buddies or friends, but rather we're going to go at this project with focus and with discipline. That's something really different from so much of the teaching and learning going on in the schools today. And few students actually get this kind of one-on-one relationship with someone who's not in their family. This is also a kind of sequential behavioral approach. I start out the lessons with seriousness in this way, and then we can loosen it up and have fun later. If we start with the fun part, I find that it's hard to bring in the seriousness when needed. This is a principle that I recommend to my students who will be teaching in the schools. If you start out loosely in terms of discipline, it's hard to regain control. If you start out with discipline and organization, one can always let the rules relax as time goes on. So I've often been surprised that even advanced cellists in college don't really know their fingerboard very well. So knowledge of the positions is a fundamental way of knowing the latitude and longitude on the cello and knowing how intervals relate across the strings. Sometimes people teach first and fourth positions because you can reach most of the notes that way, but that isn't enough. One needs to know second and second and a half and all the extended positions, and not to forget fifth and fifth and a half and sixth position, etc. Knowing the positions is a really important tool for knowing and understanding the cello. And I'm going to talk more about this in our session here on scales in December. So as I mentioned earlier, I divide my lessons into the 5 parts, and I recommend that my students actually practice that way also. The first part of a regular lesson is what I call warm-ups. And this may be just 5 or 6 minutes of the lesson or the practice session, but it's actually a really important part. It helps to take us out of the crazy outside world and bring us into the cello world. I often say that we cellists are athletes. We're not necessarily football players, we're small muscle athletes. And we need to be as aware as football players about how to use the body in the best way. And of course, we need to try and prevent injuries by good body usage. So some of the important principles that we need to be aware of are, first of all, body alignment, a good sitting position, awareness of the head, the shoulders. And I really recommend Alexander technique for working on some of those issues that can have a major impact in our playing. No kinks, in other words, no bends in our arms or wrists. These kinks are one of the major causes of tendinitis. So I often use the image of a water bucket going into a well. There's a bucket and there's a rope around the bucket and a gear at the top. And the place that the rope is going to tear or break is at the top when it goes over that gear. That's where the friction is that causes the rope to break. Well, our joints are similarly the place where our tendons can get frayed, and that's one of the major causes of carpal tunnel syndrome or tendinitis. Next thing is no muscles fighting muscles, another major cause of tension and one that we need to continually be vigilant about. Not squeezing or having muscles trying to go in the opposite direction at the same time, like with the thumb going up and the fingers going down, for example. And then a general rule, if you can move a body part, the muscle is more relaxed. Another reason why left-right motion is actually really important for intermediate level players. I highly recommend doing some stretches in the lessons or in the group classes. One of the things to recognize is that when we exercise or run or play the cello, acid can actually build up in the joints. So it's really important to stretch before and after playing, just as a runner will stretch before and after running. I've been proud that in my studio of almost 50 years of teaching, very few of my students have had issues with injury and tendinitis. It's because we spend a lot of time working on how best to use the body in playing. There are lots and lots of good stretches to do before and after playing, but I don't want to take the time here to review those now since we could take the rest of today's session on just that. But I do want to mention one that I find particularly useful and as not as well known, and I call it the anti-tendinitis stretch. And so what this is you put your hands together and let the arms come down, and then they come back up and you shake it out to relax and so forth. And what this is doing is stretching those tendons and exercising them in a good way. And of course, this is no pain, no gain kind of situation. You don't want pain at all from any of this. So you go as far as you can go reasonably, and then you come back up and shake it out. And then you can also do it the opposite direction with the hands together like that. And another one for the fingers that I find a lot of fun in a group setting is this series of coordination exercises. So in this you go, take your arm like that and your left arm like this, and you go 1, 4, 2, 3. I hope you can see me. 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, like that. Or you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can get that pretty fast. And then the hardest one is 1, 3, 2, 4. 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3. So these are good for things like thirds, and it's just a good general exercise for coordination, which is kind of fun. And at first they may seem difficult even to you, but after a while they become easier, and they're actually a very good party trick among cellists. So there are a number of great warm-up books out there for you to explore, including our own Selma Goxon's Mega Baby. And here's the index for Mega Baby. And I know this is really hard to read right here off the screen, and it's going to go fast, but you can see it more clearly in the PowerPoint later on that we'll send around. And then there's some other excellent warm-up books. I recommend using a lot of these for your students to address a myriad of issues. And again, I know you're not going to be able to write all this down right away, but don't worry about it. We'll send it around the PowerPoint and the information. So Matt Lindstrom has a very good one of warm-ups. Martha Gashevsky, body exercises and warm-ups. Cassia Harvey, exercises for the cello finger exercises. Paul Tortier's How I Play, How I Teach. I studied with Paul, and you can see this book's kind of beat up because it's about 40 years old or something, more than that, 50 years old almost. And then many of you know Steve Doan. His Cello Ergonomics is an excellent book, and Dan Lelchuk at Tonebase has a similar one. There are a number of these kind of books out there, and they're very useful. A few years ago, my students and I put together a list of some of the warm-up exercises that we covered in lessons or in the cello classes. So it's somewhat organized. I'll go through this fast, but again, it'll be available. It may be available now in the chat. I'm not sure if it was put in there already, or else we'll send it to you for downloading a PDF of it. So these are, first of all, so this is my warm-up list, starting with general warm-ups, stretches, breathing, proprioception, isometrics, finger push-ups, waving bye-bye, improvisations, using little melodies for leaving the outside world, like getting into the cello world. And then there's some right-hand warm-ups, including open strings, strengthening the fingers, wiggle waggles, tremblement, bow distribution, bubble exercises, Duport number 7, bow coordination exercises. And then continuing with the right hand, Galamian dynamics exercises, sans filet, the Tortelier bow speed exercises, front and back of the hand exercises, etc. Some string crossing kinds of things. And then there's some left hand exercises, of course, extensions, which we'll look at more closely in a minute, overextensions, Mary exercises, which I hope I'll get to talk about in a future session. And then, of course, trill exercises, Aldulescu finger exercises, various Foyar exercises, Tortelier exercises for strengthening the thumb, and of course Kostman exercises. There are actually several of them. Many people just use the first one, but the second is equally interesting for various issues, and I'll show these afterwards when we talk about articulation. And then various exercises for intonation, shifting, agility, speed, etc., etc. And I think it's actually very important to have some cadence exercises in your tool house. Things like, so minor 6, tritone, third, or those kind of little cadence exercises are very helpful for helping the kids understand dominant and tonic relationships and those kind of things. Next, also a great way to sensitize the intervals is what I call the configuration of the hand, knowing how the intervals work on the cello. So for example, again, knowing that a half step across the string is a minor sixth, but if you reverse the two fingers, you get a tritone. And that's going to be true, of course, any place on the cello. And just understanding that concept can really change the way they understand the fingerboard. Or understanding that 1-3, for example, a major six reverses to a perfect fourth. So, and that again, any place on the cello. That kind of information, I think, is worth spending a little bit of time on as an exercise, warm-up type of exercise. And then, of course, we need various shifting exercises and vibrato exercises of all kinds, and more vibrato exercises of all kinds. And I really love these Alexanian thumb position exercises. They were never actually published at all by Alexanian or afterwards. Alexanian was a student of Casals, and he got it apparently from Casals. And I got them through my teacher in Germany, who got them from Casado, who was his teacher. So there are several pages of these that are really excellent. They deal with various extended thumb position issues and are really useful for things like the Haydn D major concerto and many other pieces. There are 12 of them, and they're all really great. And I suggest you get them from the PowerPoint in the chat after this session, because they've not been published. There's no other way to get them. So I presented all these various exercises as warm-ups. But I would never teach them as I just gave to you all as a list. Each one would be part of a lesson in which that particular topic has come up. For example, bow distribution or vibrato, etc., etc. That implies that each one of them was taught individually at appropriate moments in a cellist's development. Each one would be given during lessons as needed, then practiced, and then after they'd been absorbed and internalized, they can be used as warm-ups. So finally, now we get to the essence of what today's session is really all about, exploring a sequential approach in using exercises to build technique for the intermediate level student. So exercises help focus attention on one specific aspect of technique. It's work on the molecular level of the technical and musical universe. The teacher of the intermediate level student needs to have a large variety of exercises that address both fundamental and also very sophisticated issues of shifting, vibrato, articulation, trills, etc., etc. We need multiple approaches to addressing these issues because not every solution will work for every student. When I first started teaching, I kept a card file with little exercises that I collected from teachers, from master classes, from articles in journals, and from conversations with other string players and teachers. So this was my little card file here, and so each one of these has martelé, shifts, up bow staccato, bow speed, third, sixth, half position, perpetual motion, all those kind of things. Here you get a little bit better idea. You can see, maybe you can or can't see that. So I now encourage my students who are starting to teach to keep their own collection of exercises so that later they'll be able to draw on them as necessary. Needless to say, we won't have time to visit all of these exercises today, but my pedagogical approach is that I try to teach many of the technical concepts through exercises, then apply them in etudes, and finally use them in pieces. Some of these exercises are truly sequential, and others may be just a matter of finding the right one for a particular moment in a student's development. So let's take a couple of examples of the sequencing of exercises. And if we have time today, I'd like to look at a sequential approach to teaching extensions and articulation, maybe those two things. So let's start with extensions. Of course, before starting to do extensions, we have to make sure that the basic left-hand setup is okay. And we went over that a few minutes ago, the finger spacing and so forth. Next, we need to make sure that the student knows how to check for intonation. So we use the perfect intervals for checking all over the cello because these intervals have to be truly perfect. And they make the cello ring with perfect fourths and perfect fifths, octaves, and unisons, the perfect intervals. With thirds or sixths, or with seconds or sevenths, we can debate how high or low a note should be. But with the perfect intervals, there's no room for discussion about how the intervals should sound. They have to be perfect, or perfect, as we say in New York. Casals used to say that every day when he took up his cello, he needed to find first position. And this is how we'd do it. You'd find the first finger in the string above and get a perfect fourth, and the fourth finger with the string below and get a perfect octave. Then for extensions, we have to be aware again of the finger spacing. Instead of half steps between the fingers, we now have a whole step between the first and second finger and half steps between 2, 3, and 4. So now if we do an extension, we can break it down into what I call the 5-step process for extensions. This is really very sequential. I usually ask the students, what do you think is the first thing that needs to happen when we make an extension? And I rarely get a good answer. What I'm looking for is, in this 5-step process, the very first thing is to release the thumb. If you don't release the thumb from the back of the neck, the hand won't be able to move properly, and the thumb will not end up in the right place under the second finger in the extension. So if you had a little video camera recording this process and then slowing it down, you might see these 5 steps. First of all, release thumb, then pivot on the first finger, extend the first finger, the arm forward, and then the fingers down with the thumb under the second. Of course, they all happen basically at the same time, but you can break it down and making sure that each one of those steps are really happening correctly. So then we can do some exercises to solidify this information. So the first of these would be and I might have them go through and actually say what they're doing. So release thumb, pivot on the first finger, extend the first finger, arm forward, fingers down. And a lot of checking involved with that also. So checking that. Oh, I got a little sharp there. So checking those things. And then the second exercise is similar, checking the G again. And making sure your hand position is right and that all those steps were going in the right order, in the right way. And the other one is the other kind of extension, is the extension backwards. For which you put the weight on the fourth finger as you extend back. So in this, as you see, it's first position and half extended using the position system that I use and that I'll explain more about in another session here. So that's not backward extension really, that is half extended position. Once this concept is really solidified, after several weeks, I might introduce the concept of overextensions, which are very important for connecting notes across a string. For example, in a D scale. So now I'm not just extending, but I'm overextending. And in an overextension, the thumb can come out as needed behind the neck or whatever your hand, the size of your hand. I have a pretty small hand, so I need to really kind of come out a lot with my thumb. And the fingers then spread apart. So it's very different from a regular extension, but very useful for connecting, in this case, the B and the A there. But of course, I wouldn't introduce overextensions until the regular extensions themselves are well done. And once again, this is all very sequential. There are lots of great exercises in all the method books for working further on extensions. But frankly, in my experience, once the student understands the concept and works on these few exercises and then applies them to the Dot-Sauer etudes and to appropriate literature, I almost never need to use any additional materials. If we had more time today, I'd love to demonstrate how I use the sequential approach to working on shifts, vibrato, trills, thumb position, etc., everything. But with the few remaining minutes, let me just sketch out how I would approach the topic of articulation using exercises. So, for articulation, the first concept that a student needs to grapple with is how little finger pressure we need to use in playing. I often start with showing how you can play an E harmonic with the finger lightly touching the string and then gradually pressing down on the string until one hears the fundamental. So I'm now get the fundamental, but I would point out that the tip of the finger is not even touching the fingerboard. So I can play the notes with minimal pressure. I once had a young student who came to me playing very virtuosic music in thumb position at age 10 with lightning speed. I didn't even understand how she could play so fast. But as I watched her, I realized that she was playing with her left hand on the side of the string and pulling it slightly to the left rather than pressing down at all. Unfortunately, she didn't have a big projecting sound, but what was really interesting to watch, and it really helped me to recognize and realize that one doesn't need to press the string down into the fingerboard. I don't advocate playing on the side of the string as a regular thing, but sometimes it actually does come in handy. So there are three kinds of finger weights. Very light for playing harmonics and that sort of thing, playing very fast also. Very heavy for playing pizzicato, because if you don't hold the string down with the finger, then the sound won't continue. So it needs to be quite heavy. And then there's regular weight, which really consists of an articulation and then a release of the finger. And this is the most complicated of the three weights because it's really composed of these two things, articulation and release. The articulation we're talking about is what Pablo Casals called the percussive left hand. Or what Gerhard Mantel called the plosive noise when the fingerboard is hit. The problem for cellists is they need to recognize that after that initial plosive, there's a release of the finger. A good way to experience this is on your arm. When you drop your finger percussively on your arm, you immediately want to release the pressure so it doesn't hurt your arm. The feeling of the finger bouncing up is what we need in playing. So the next step is recognizing that finger articulation involves an active motion and a passive motion. The active motion is the finger actually going up, and the passive motion is the finger going down. Just as with a rubber band, if you want to shoot a rubber band, you stretch it and then release it. The stretching or pulling motion is the active motion. The release is passive. So you get a little ping sound and then release. So after trying this out with a slow chromatic scale, a few notes, I would then assign a little rhythmical exercise where one can experience the active and passive motions, the ping sound, and especially the release of the fingers, and making sure all the non-playing fingers are relaxed. So this little exercise, you can do with all the combinations of the fingers. That was 1, 2. So 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 4, all the combinations. And if I see fingers popping in the air, I know that the fingers are not relaxed. Sometimes people think it's just a little finger that's popping up. It doesn't really matter. It's just a little tension. But I need to make sure that the student understands that if you have this little tension in the finger and do that over and over again, it'll be impossible to play something like Bach or something that goes on for 20 or 40 minutes. And that's the underlying cause, or one of the causes of tendinitis. So after doing this exercise for a while, I like to give them the great exercise by Radu Ardulescu, the Romanian cellist who I worked with in some master classes. And this is a combination of all the four fingers. So the first one on the top there is 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, sorry. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it on the combinations under the first column. And then 1, 2, 4, 3 would be. And so forth. Then the next step, this is all sequential, would be Kosman number 1, famous Kosman number 1. But I would actually also do it with a slightly different fingering. So the regular Kosman is. And so forth. The other fingering is to repeat the third group. Here. So then it's 2, 4, 3, 4, which is quite a bit harder to get through all of the strings that way. And then finally, the next Kosman, which is often forgotten about, is the one that goes across strings. Sorry, start again. excellent. It's an excellent articulation exercise. So, in general, my recommendation is to have a lot of good exercises in your toolbox to choose from for a particular technical problem, and to find a good sequence to use. Just like a doctor who does diagnostic testing to ascertain the source of a problem, we need to have a lot of possible solutions for a particular problem. So in the third session, the next time, we'll focus specifically on using exercises to teach bow technique. And the following session will focus on a syllabus of scales and arpeggios which build on those exercises. So thank you for listening. I know it went a little bit long. At this point, if you have any questions, if anybody's left here with us, any comments, I'd be glad to hear from you. I can't really tell. Selma, are you there? I can't really tell if people need to unmute themselves, I guess, or Eric.
Yes, and everybody should be able to unmute themselves and turn on their video now.
Thank you, Bob. That was a splendid presentation.
Thank you.
I learned so much. And I'm looking forward to two things, to printing off some of the slides. Are we going to be able to do that when we get the PDF? Some of the exercises would be really nice to have in a usable format.
I'm sure that you can, yeah, you can print it out from the PDF, yeah.
Yeah, so you're going to send the PowerPoint as a PDF format, and then we can print the pages that we need.
Right. And then this whole session was recorded, hopefully. Hopefully we had the technology going, and you'll make that available then through the
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Of course. I just have one comment about extensions that I studied with a viola player called William Linser, as you know. And he gave me the idea about working the Kosman in triplets because he said there are the flexors and the extensors. The extensors put the fingers down, but he said very few exercises work the flexors, which is the lifting off of the fingers. And so he said, if you do your exercises in triplets, you have an alternating putting the finger down and lifting it off on strong beats. And that is the way I often practice the Kosman. When you go through all those pages and pages in Kosman and it becomes second nature to you, then you can do two things. You can practice them in triplets, but you can also practice them in extensions.
Right.
So the intervals and extensions. So the first exercise you showed, the Kosman, number one, you could practice it as a Mary position and practice the whole thing that way. And so you get continuing benefit through your professional life. Because he used to say to me, once you can do something and do it really well, don't keep on working on it because you don't have anything to gain from it.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree that these exercises, you continually want to sort of dig deeper into them and find other ways and other things to gain out of it, not just do the same old, same thing
Yeah,
once you've gotten that. Yeah,
exactly.
that's great. That's great. There are also rhythmical variations that you can do. I forget the name of Party. Margaret Party has a whole set of rhythmical kinds of exercises that you can use for any of these things that are wonderful for scales as well as the Kosman.
I'll just. Jeff Solo has a question.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi there. Spectacular presentation.
Thanks.
Makes me feel extremely inadequate as a teacher.
Oh my God. I admire you so much as a player. I remember your Mendelssohn from your recording from years and years and years ago.
I have a couple of questions and other points. Gary Hoffman and I were roommates for a year in New York, and of course we did lots of talking about teachers and cello playing and Mr. Starker, and he had a particularly interesting exercise from his teacher before Janos Starker, Karl Frew, who was a distinguished teacher in Chicago.
Right.
And it was, when you were talking about Casals percussive and the plosive Gerhard Mantel. So I step up so you can see my leg. Karl Frew's exercise was, if you slap your thigh, start with your hand here and just do that. When you land, you're completely relaxed. You have a gentle but solid impact, and nobody goes "Ugh," and
Yeah,
smashes. They relax afterwards, and I thought that is a really great exercise.
great idea. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
And I
I just love these. I love these kind of give and takes because there's always so many approaches to these things and new ideas. And I'll try this one out in the class that I have coming up right later today.
what do you do? How do you deal with students who are double jointed and have very easy collapsible fingers?
Yeah, I have a thing called isometrics that I do with a lot of people, and it really seems to solve. I mean, there are some people that are truly double jointed, but I found in my experience that people who think they're double jointed are often not really double jointed. So isometrics, some of you may know about isometrics. When I was a kid in gym class in the 1950s, they didn't have all the fancy equipment that they have now at gyms. They would just line us up against a wall, and we would push against the wall for a couple of seconds or a minute or whatever. And that was our strength training for the muscles that push against the wall. And that's called isometrics. And we can do it in different ways. Another one that they did at the time was this one. You just push one arm against the other. Basically, the idea is a muscle against an inanimate object or another muscle. And we can do it like the one I show people first is put the hands together and then bend the fingers like that, just making sure that the fingers are really round so they're not collapsed. And if you can't put any pressure and have them round, then fine, just stay like that until you can put a little bit of pressure on. Making sure, the key is to make sure that they're really round, each finger. And this, for a lot of people, it's the little finger that needs help, but different people, different things. So then once they got that, then move the palms of the hand further away so they're together like this to be they're stronger that way, and then a little further away, and see how far you can get without having it collapse. Over a period of even a couple of weeks, these fingers usually get very strong, and I've really never had anybody who wasn't able to have fingers round and that sort of thing. And this is especially good, I think, for thumb position. We haven't talked about it yet. I think I'm planning on doing that in another session, but the thumb, I like to think of the innie and the outie on the thumb here. And a lot of times getting that organized requires various kinds of little exercises to, pressing one finger against the other so it becomes really stable, so that when you're using thumb position, you're able to keep the thumb in the same, so it doesn't sort of wiggle in and out as you're going up in thumb position. So isometrics would be part of my solution, one of my solutions for that. What do you do, Jeff?
Uh, well, that's interesting. I will try that. In some case, I mean, my best example of when you said with some people, my former student Felix Wang, who studied with me at the University of Michigan and now
Yeah, yeah,
teaches in Vanderbilt
right.
University, who is a
Wonderful cellist.
just spectacular cellist.
Yeah.
He every single finger collapsed in the first joint, and
Wow.
I talked about it for a couple of lessons, and his fingers would not uh, do anything else. And at that point, I said, okay. Uh, Theoretically, it's better not to do that. Your fingers collapse there very easily. They absolutely don't get in your way, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But in the future, when you teach, you should make sure that your students don't think, well, that's the ideal way to play because it works for you. And I also had another
Does he
interesting.
still play? Does he still play that way?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Tortelier actually advocated bending in the fingers like that, this joint of the finger, on both the bow and the left hand. That there was sort of a suction cup kind of thing that he did. And I actually, in thumb position, my first finger, because of the first finger is too short and doesn't have very much flesh there at the end, so I don't get a good sound if I try to keep that completely round. If I go like this, bent in, it gets a much better sound, and it doesn't. People say, "Oh, won't that slow you down or something?" And it doesn't. I mean, I can play
No,
just as
I
fast.
absolutely the same in thumb position. I have very, some people have fingernails that are kind of flat on the end, and others are more curved around. And I have to, if I'm playing a half step with my thumb, I either have to collapse it or lean backwards or do various other things. One can notice, of course, that Yo-Yo collapses his first finger basically all the time there in
Oh, I
thumb
didn't know that.
position.
Huh.
and Rostropovich extremely frequently collapsed his third finger, which you do, but I kind of trained myself out of it. But you can see that he does that a lot. And I had a student who had very weak hands, and she collapsed in these knuckles, and the only solution for her was to on purpose collapse the last ones down at the end,
Yeah.
because then she could maintain the shape for the ones farther back. I've also had some students, uh, I can't collapse this joint. I can collapse these joints. So I don't know what it feels like to collapse, the main knuckle there. But
Yeah, unfortunately, that happens for me. This one does do that, and I work so it doesn't do that. I mean, I do isometrics and other kinds of things, so that I am not doing that.
Well, often find when students they kind of have a choice. They either can collapse this one or they collapse this one, and then the last one gets a really sharp kink in it. And if they can't train to get an even distribution of curve all the way, I say, okay, just collapse this one, because there's a lot of great cellists that collapse that one. And I don't see cellists collapsing the next ones up there
Right,
uh,
right.
functionally. So it's one of these things. Sometimes that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Bob, I
Right.
wanted to announce that we've posted in the chat your warm-up
Okay,
list,
great.
but would you
Thanks.
like it to be sent as a PDF along with your
Um, if people are interested in getting it and they can't get it from the chat, then I think oftentimes when you watch it later, the chat doesn't show up. Maybe I'm not sure.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
we'll email that warm-up
yeah,
list along with
yeah.
the PowerPoint.
By the way,
So you
one
get
thing for people to think about for the next to last session that we do, the sixth session, it'll be on repertoire. And what I'm hoping to do in that is talk about repertoire that's not very well known, not the usual, the Bach suites and all the famous concertos, but things that are not very well known. And I'd like to try to collect several examples from people. So if you want to think about that and send me, an email with information about either you performing it or a student performing it or on YouTube or whatever, so that people are a little bit more aware of some other pieces that are usable. Any other questions, comments, criticisms?
I liked very much the idea about what fingers do as a double stop on one pair of strings, and then what they become if you swap the fingers around the different interval you get. I thought using that as a exercise would be very useful, because I think learning the positions kind of across the strings is one of the hardest things to get kids to appreciate, because the intervals can become quite abstract, especially if there's a string missed in the middle. So I wondered if anyone had kind of more strategies for that, maybe.
Yeah, it's another example of where students really don't know their fingerboard very well. They don't understand the concept of what they're doing. They can learn the pieces, but they're not learning the bigger issue of how is this constructed, and how do you get an octave, and the different ways you can get thirds or whatever. Yeah.
Mm.
I wanted to share one more thing about extensions. Margaret Roll, I think you know who Margaret
Yeah,
was.
sure.
Well, what's her name? Irene Sharp
Irene.
was
Yeah.
her disciple. And
Right.
Irene told me that when she was young, she had a teacher with a very long nose. And so he used to put his fingertip, his left forefinger, on the tip of his nose, and he'd raise it and lower it. And when he lowered it, he showed how you have to drop the joint, the base joint of that first finger in order to stretch the rest of the hand. That if you kept that joint tight and tried to stretch, you would stiffen the whole hand. But if you release that base joint, and the hand would drop directly from the
Yeah, doing
Explain it.
extensions.
Explain it one more time, Selma.
okay. I don't know if my picture is showing. It would
You're
be
It's
very
kind of
dark.
dark, but I think you mean this, right?
yes. Yeah, so you put the tip of your forefinger, left forefinger, on your nose, and then you just drop the whole hand down. So it opens the hand like a fan. And you'll see that you have to release that base joint of the forefinger in order to stretch comfortably. And I've
So
always shown that I don't have a very long nose, but I just hold my finger there at the tip like this, and I drop it and bring it up and drop it and bring it
yeah,
up.
extensions are one of the most difficult, quote unquote, things in playing the cello. So one of the least sort of natural. We talk about violinists having to have their arms around like that, but
Hmm.
extensions for us is everything else is nice and organized, and
Yeah.
extensions is hard. And I remember when I was a student in Germany in Freiburg, I would actually walk around town with a cork, a wine cork, between my first and second finger, just to train that like that. Of course, I had a great bottle of wine the night before then, and I had the cork then, and I don't know. But I would, but it really helped me understand. It helped my hand, which again is sort of small and actually very tight across this tendon here. So I had to really kind of work on getting that to open up. And
Yeah.
now what's interesting is well, let's see. I don't know if you can see this on it, but if this hand has much more stretch than this hand,
Hmm.
just because of the training. So this one can only stretch that far. That's my natural way, and I don't need to stretch further for the bow. But the left hand, I'm able to stretch much, much further.
Hmm. It's also useful to teach extensions in reverse. So you put the forefinger down and then you open the hand like a fan.
Yeah,
And that's a very natural thing for beginners to
absolutely. Yeah.
learn. I never teach extensions to beginners 1 to 4 because I find they'll pronate and then try to stretch. But if they move from the fourth finger and stretch back, they can't really harm themselves.
Yeah, and or sometimes they'll do like an extension between 3 and 4, which
Yeah.
sophisticated players will sometimes do something like that if after the fact. But in the sequential kind of step by step learning process, you don't want to have people do that in the beginning.
No, no.
Great.
Jeff has one more question.
Yes, actually, it's not a question. It's the way that I explain uh, the procedure of doing extensions is if you, I will, I don't know if you can, you won't be able to see my legs, but if everyone, you know, when I'm a scuba diver, and when you're on a boat and you go off the side of the boat or off the back, you stand there and you do a giant stride into the water. Where, if assuming you're right-handed, you're usually right-legged, and you stick your right leg way out in front of you and just step into the water, and you do essentially that kind of a giant stride on the floor if you stand, just straight, balanced, stand in a normal way, and then do a giant step forward. Uh, Everybody does it the same way. Your body goes with your leg. You don't stand there and do um, uh, I forgot what you call it, Robert Crumb's illustration. Uh, uh, but your body weight goes with your leg when you step forward.
Hmm.
And then if you're standing there and you step backwards and you don't know what's behind you, you wouldn't do the same thing. You would stick your leg back all by itself, keeping your body weight where it is until your backwards extending leg touches the ground, and then you transfer the rest of your weight backwards. And of course, you do exactly the same thing that if I'm playing on my first finger, my body would be the equivalent of my arm, and I release, as you said, and my arm goes with all of the extending fingers. And if I'm going to go backwards, I cautiously extend my leg to touch, and then everything contracts back. And people understand that very well when they do it with their legs on the floor, and it makes it easy to transfer that same idea to the fingerboard.
Great. Nice. Okay. Any other? I can't see
I
the
think we're
chats or
I
whatever.
think we're good.
Good.
Thank you so much for an informative and really illuminating session. And we're looking forward to the next and the next and the next.
Okay. The next one is in, I think, 2 weeks, right?
That's
Sunday.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Selma. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure, and thank you all for coming.
Yes.
Thank
Take
you
care.
all for
Great.
attending. Bye-bye for now.